coming along. It's great to be back after a year or so ago, and I've just been made Minister of Transport. And the thesis of my speech a year ago was straightforward. To create a brighter, more prosperous future for New Zealanders, we have to allow Auckland to grow and become a world-class international city. And it means, as a country, saying yes a lot more often and no a lot less. Yes to infrastructure, yes to events, yes to transit-oriented development, yes to housing, and yes to growth. But saying yes is not just a political slogan or ideological posturing about progress. It means real change, and that's what this government is about. We're a reforming government. We refuse to accept the idea that New Zealand is in a state of perpetual managed decline. We refuse to accept the idea that we can slip into the ranks of a relatively wealthy, middle-income country where our best and brightest leave. We refuse to accept the idea of managed mediocrity. With bold and tough decisions, and by tackling the tough issues, we can lift living standards for everyone and drive increased prosperity. In education, we are reversing the 30-year experiment on our children of pretending that basic knowledge and facts don't matter. We're restoring standards, teaching the basics, and focusing on achievement. We're reversing wealth-destructive, earthquake-prone building legislation, a big boon for Auckland, opening up competition in building materials, tackling joint and several liability and building consenting. We're finally sorting out the Holidays Act. We've got major reforms underway to employment law and health and safety. In short, we are fixing the basics of the economy and building the future. Now, I have the enormous privilege of driving change in a number of areas, and I think we've accomplished a lot in the last 2 years. As Rupert mentioned, the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill, the replacement to the RMA, are in the House. Now, there's going to be some changes required. There's voluminous feedback coming in, which you'd expect, and we will make those changes as required to get the bills right. And we're working cross-party, or trying to work cross-party, to make sure we get a durable resource management legislation that is fit for the future for New Zealand. We've got fast track underway. 10 projects were granted consent last year, representing thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of investment. 6 of those projects are Auckland-based, including the Ports of Auckland extension, which we turned to sod on last year. 2 quarry expansions, critical for Auckland's growth, and 3 mixed residential developments. Construction started last year, or the last 6 months actually of last year, on $7 billion of central government funded infrastructure, including the level crossings here in Auckland. And as we begin this year, there is a lot to look forward to. The economy is undoubtedly turning a corner. Now, we've gone through a long and difficult economic adjustment. High inflation post-COVID, interest rates that hurt many households, and a downturn that's taken time to unwind. But the recent forecasts show, and the data backs this up, that the economy is beginning to turn a corner. Growth is strengthening, unemployment is stabilising, confidence is returning, there's real momentum. In Auckland, I sense a real sense of optimism. We've got the NZICC that's just opened. We've just liberalised Eden Park's planning rules so it can host more concerts and events. The Central Interceptor project will open later this year. Auckland Transport is going back into Auckland Council. We're close on the city and regional deal. The airport's got billions of dollars of infrastructure investment underway. The tennis centre's getting a roof on, as Rupert said. And later this year, City Rail Link will open. Later this year. In the second half of the year. As will the new rail stations. People often forget it. People get focused on CRL, which is quite right, but there are 2 new railway stations opening later this year at Drury and Parata. Just quietly behind the scenes, Auckland is building an entirely new city in the south of Auckland at Drury. Ngākaroa station will open in 2027. The 3rd main line is open. Project talked about for 30 years, separating freight and passenger traffic. We've electrified the line to Pukekohe. The Auckland rail network rebuild. It's finally coming to an end. I know many people will welcome that. Just a few days ago, we confirmed funding to complete the Eastern Busway, project that's been underway for a long time. Yesterday, NZTA applied for fast-track approval for the Northwestern Busway. Slowly but surely, the Auckland Rapid Transit Network is coming together and being built, and that's fantastic. So it's within that context of the development of the Rapid Transit Network that I want to talk about housing and its importance to New Zealand. And I think you know my views that for too long, housing has held us back economically and socially. Economically, housing eats up disposable income, less money that can go towards goods, services and investment. It ties up wealth and displaces productive investment. A lack of housing in the right place also means we leave productivity and agglomeration benefits on the table. And socially, housing plays a large factor in young New Zealanders deciding to leave New Zealand to find better opportunities. And of course, it tips New Zealanders into situations where they need more support. There's 20,000 families on the social housing waitlist. Various governments have put housing in the too hard basket. We are different and we are tackling it. There are three major reasons I talk about in terms of the importance of housing. Number one is boosting the economy. Housing is a productivity enabler, and for decades we have suffered from a productivity disease. As Paul Krugman observed, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. It drives our standard of living and our prosperity. And we are blessed with extraordinary competitive advantages, an abundance of natural resources, an abundance of land, cheap renewable energy, and the number 8 wire mentality, but we've fallen behind. We used to take advantage of these opportunities. In 1900, New Zealand had the highest number of patent applications per capita in the world. In the 1950s and 60s, we built innovative and world-leading infrastructure. In the 60s, our productivity was above Australia, but in the 70s, it dropped, and the gap has kept widening. Nowadays, our productivity is closer to places like Poland, Hungary.
Minister, it's Karl Mokaraka here. I'm talking on behalf of South Auckland and Papatui. Hey, I'm just asking if there's reassurances that... Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, I won't take long. I'll let him talk to his beautiful... I'll make it fit. I noticed that there's not many South Aucklanders here, so I'm coming on behalf of our people. Oh, yeah, no, I'll just make my comment and then I'll ask him if that's fine, and then I'll end. Yeah, no, that's fine. But what I'm saying is for the Minister, because I want reassurances. We don't trust our Auckland Council, and South Auckland becomes the dumping ground for project housing, and for example, like the MIT building in Otara, it's a large building site that's vacant, and we're very worried that that's going to impact on South Auckland households. We've got a lot of social issues, and I don't know, Minister, you're in Wellington, I'm in Otara and Papatui, and we've got a lot of concerns. We've got social concerns.
Yeah.
All the transitional housing seems to be based in South Auckland.
Well, if you let me finish my speech, I'm giving a speech about how we tackle those social problems. Well, you haven't heard it yet, so maybe give me a chance. Look, I'm really happy to sit down with you, Karl, offline about it. All I'd say to you in relation to South Auckland is Kāinga Ora has actually got a massive urban regeneration program happening through what's called the large-scale projects. A lot of people haven't heard about it, but there's a big infrastructure investment going in there.
There's a lot of problems with Kāinga Ora. I know you make the high-level decisions.
Okay, you asked for a question, I'm going to give you an answer, but maybe these guys have come here to hear me speak and make a relatively large announcement, so perhaps we could take it off.
Because South Auckland always gets missed, Honourable Minister, and that's probably why I'm here, because I know there's not a lot of South Aucklanders here, and our suburbs are the, I suppose, dumping grounds of...
Well, I wouldn't put it like that, my friend, and I don't...
You live in Wellington, sir. I live in the reality of South Auckland.
Okay.
And I know that ministers often come with their highfalutin, theories, but I really just ask that you put in some safeguards and assurances for people in South Auckland and households and
well, let me assure you, Karl, one of the benefits of the housing plan I'm announcing today, if I get a chance to, is there will be big benefits for South Auckland, because what is the biggest thing driving poverty and inequity in South Auckland? Housing costs. You will know that. You go out to South Auckland, so many people spend so much of their money on unaffordable rentals for poor quality housing, and they can't get into the housing market because house prices in South Auckland are too expensive. So if you give me a chance to finish, I'll explain to you how we're going to... Okay.
Your government's big on the FTA, and that's fine. I'm a great-grandchild of an immigrant, but we are having the impacts on the ground level in South Auckland, where we're competing for jobs, we're competing for housing, and all these things are impacting us. So I think that's probably a consideration for the Honourable, for yourself and the Honourable Christopher Luxon, my friend Christopher Luxon, and that's something to consider in South Auckland, because we're living in the reality, sir. Unlike in Wellington, you're gapped, or there's a big space, and so
Let me tell you, mate, I'm in Auckland quite a bit, and the other thing I'd say is we're all on this together, right? New Zealand's a country, and let's not divide it up by geography. So anyway, I mean, you've had a good run. Can you let me finish?
No, so I'll just say, hey, all the best to you, sir. I know it's an election year.
Appreciate it.
Obviously, these announcements are being made because it's election year and everybody's trying to election year. But, I'm just asking, don't forget the people of South Auckland and places that are the most vulnerable because, and I'm all for business and I'm all for economy, and seeing our country do well. But I say that with the deepest respect to National, there is a gap that you guys always put everybody else first, but Kiwis, you don't put us at the front and centre. And that's what we're feeling in South Auckland. So.
I think that's a perspective that I'm trying to challenge, as I say, and I'm trying to give a speech about how we actually overcome that sort of mentality. And South Auckland is an area that National and the country cares deeply about. And one of the biggest issues in South Auckland, which I think is the point you're making, is housing. And I'm trying to give a speech about how housing can be better in South Auckland, and we've got plans to make sure that's a reality. So totally understand where you're coming from, and really happy to sit down with you and talk about our plans and have a cup of tea.
Thank you very much.
Good on you. Appreciate it. Okay. Anyone else want to say anything, or we'll? Okay. Anyway, I was trying to make the point around productivity and how it's the driver of wages, and our productivity is closer to places like Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, and other Western European countries we like to compare ourselves to. So, in other words, productivity in New Zealand is on a par with countries that experience 40 years of communism, which I think says it all. Complacency is a blight on progress. It's going to take a sustained effort and hard work across many years to really get productivity going again. A good starting point is housing. There's a mountain of economic evidence that cities are engines of productivity and that bigger is better. Doubling a city's population could increase output by 3.5%, and on average, workers in cities earn 1/3 more than their non-urban counterparts. Throughout history, cities have become engines of innovation. Florence in the 15th century, Amsterdam in the 17th century, London in the 18th century, San Francisco today. A well-functioning housing market that delivers thriving cities, growing productivity and supercharged industry will do more to create a brighter future for everyone in this room and for everyone in New Zealand, including in South Auckland, than just about anything else the government can do. Early modelling of our RMA reform suggests that by liberalising housing, we can lift GDP by at least 0.5% annually by 2050, with growth continuing thereafter. That is a real and material lift in living standards. We also need to help get the government's books back in order, and that's the second reason to care about housing. Central government spent $5 billion last year alone on housing assistance in its many different forms, from accommodation supplement, income-related rents, emergency housing. The system is complicated, confusing, and often duplicative. It's also extremely expensive. $5 billion over a 4-year budget period is $20 billion. That's 15 transmission gullies, 7 Dunedin hospitals, just on housing subsidies, and there's an astonishing amount of money. Now, there'll always be people who can't survive in the market, no matter how affordable it is, but improving housing affordability significantly reduces the demand on the government for housing support. The third reason to fix housing is the moral case. Something's gone wrong in a country that has abundant land, but when home ownership is at record lows. We used to pride ourselves on being a property-owning democracy. Something's gone wrong when New Zealanders search overseas in support of more affordable housing. There's a generation of young people ready to leave New Zealand, and it's because we haven't, as a country, made enough room for them in a city where land is not scarce. The simple truth is that young people don't have the same opportunities to get into the housing market as their parents did or their grandparents did. 20 years ago, our housing market met the widely accepted standard for affordable, with a ratio of house prices and wages at 3-to-1. Now they outstrip wages by around 6-to-1. So this is an issue of intergenerational equity. We are determined to fix our housing crisis, and we are making progress. Rents are flat and more affordable, the social housing register is down, and the share of first home buyers in the market was at record levels at the end of last year. We've got 3 pillars to our Going for Housing growth policy. Pillar 1 is about freeing up land for development. Pillar 2 is about improving infrastructure funding. and financing. In 2024, we made decisions on Pillar 1, which includes targets for Tier 1 and 2 councils to live zone housing demand capacity, making it easier for cities to grow, strengthening intensification provisions and planning rules, requiring councils to enable mixed-use development, abolish minimum floor areas and balcony requirements. These will be delivered through our RMA reforms that are coming over the course of this year. The intention of the Planning Act reforms is to enable competitive urban land markets, where development opportunities are abundant and land prices reflect underlying development costs rather than artificial scarcity. This does mean more greenfields where the economics make sense, and it also means going up. We're also progressing reforms to infrastructure funding and financing to make it easier for developers, councils and providers to deliver projects free from local authority funding and financing constraints. That bill's before Select Committee right now, and we've released an exposure draft of another piece of legislation to replace development contributions with development levies to give councils greater flexibility to recover the costs of growth to match our flexible planning system. And we've also agreed for the Commerce Commission to become the regulator of development levies. That brings me to Plan Change 120, Auckland Council's amendments to the Unitary Plan. Plan Change 120 has been divisive, so I want to do three things today. One is set the record straight. Two is assure Aucklanders we've listened to their feedback. And thirdly, I want to recommit to growth together. So how did we get here? Starting at the beginning with the Auckland Unitary Plan, following the amalgamation of the local councils in 2010, the National Government passed special legislation to require the council to develop a consistent set of planning rules for the whole region, which is the Auckland Unitary Plan. There were 250 public meetings, there were 21,000 pieces of feedback, 13,000 submissions, an independent hearings panel, 250 days of hearings, 10,000 items of evidence, and the AUP was made operative in November 2016, and it upzoned approximately 75% of Auckland's urban land. This has presented economic researchers with a rare opportunity to study the causal effects of zoning reforms. Auckland is now home, some people might not know this, Auckland is now home to one of the most well-studied examples of zoning reforms globally. Places like New York, London and Ireland have looked to Auckland for how to make their cities more affordable. Upzoning from the AUP led to an additional 43,500 consents within 6 years, which precipitated a boom in housing construction. There's further academic research showing that it's made Auckland more affordable. Aucklanders are paying less in rent, around 30%, than they otherwise would be if the city were not upzoned. So thanks to our academics and those who paved the way for them, like Edward Glaser and Joseph Giorgio, there's now a mountain of economic evidence that the AUP worked. Building on that, the previous government introduced the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which directs councils to remove restrictive planning rules and to allow for growth up and out, and acknowledge Phil Twyford's important work on this. It's a great starting point. This government's committed to going further to help create competitive urban land markets and abundant development opportunities, which is the centrepiece of the reforms I just talked about before. Then in 2021, the previous government introduced the Medium Density Residential Standards, the MDRS. This is the 3x3 rules. Now, most councils have changed their plans to enable the MDRS rules in their district plans. But for cities like Auckland that have a significant variation in housing demand by location, it was a very blunt one-size-fits-all tool. The reality is housing capacity is not created equal. A section near amenities and close to the CBD could have demand and be viable for 100 apartments, whereas a flood-prone section on the outer limits of Auckland could have next to no demand. Having both sections subject to the MDRS is a missed opportunity. So the government's approach to make room for growth is to set dwelling capacity targets, mandate capacity where it makes sense, and otherwise return local decision-making to councils on where growth is enabled. There's been backwards and forwards, but the direction of travel is clear. Taken together, the Unitary Plan, the MPSUD, the MDRS, and our Going for Housing growth policies represent a decade of progress in housing policy. PC 120 is the next step. We campaigned in 2023 on making it optional for councils. When I became Housing Minister, the Council asked me to let them withdraw from Plan Change 78 because it required the MDRS all over Auckland. They also wanted to downzone areas that were subject to flooding and coastal inundation. We then came to an agreement. Auckland could opt out of the MDRS, but they had to keep housing capacity at the same level or more as it would have been if Plan Change 78 was turned on. To help with that, we legislated to require large upzoning near the 5 key stations benefiting from CRL, so existing and new Aucklanders could make the most of our big investment in public transport investment. This flexibility was the right thing to do, and it became PC 120. Now, some of you are sitting there thinking, what about the 2 million homes target? It doesn't exist. The 2 million homes so-called target is derived from Auckland Council's own modelling in 2025, which concluded that PC 78 would have enabled capacity of around 2 million dwellings. So based on the equivalency requirement I've just talked about, it would have enabled capacity for around 2 million homes. It sounds like a lot, but capacity is just that. Capacity counts the number of theoretical homes if every site was developed to its permitted maximum. In reality, only a fraction of that capacity is ever built. The Auckland Unitary Plan has capacity for 1.2 million dwellings now. 10 years on from that being in place, only 100,000 houses have been built. Capacity simply means the ability to develop housing. Whether or not it gets taken up or not is dependent on a range of factors: commercial feasibility, infrastructure availability, and costs. So why do you zone for more capacity than you need? Because zoning for more dwellings that is technically needed is the bedrock of achieving affordable housing. It reduces the scarcity or artificial scarcity of urban land, it suppresses prices, and it increases competition. The idea is to give developers and builders lots of choice, and based on demand, let the market work out where it's best to build. So, to dispel the myth, PC 120 wouldn't mean 2 million houses would be built. It also wouldn't mean houses being built without appropriate infrastructure. PC 120 focuses development on areas best served by things like the Central Interceptor, the CRL, and the hundreds of millions being spent on Three Waters upgrades. But I accept the 2 million figure was a red herring that transformed into a lightning rod. There's a lesson in that, and it's one that I've learned from. It's clear a lot of Aucklanders are concerned about what growth means for them. It's completely understandable. The government understands that. The kind of angst we've experienced in Auckland is not helpful for housing growth. We need people to come with us on the journey of more capacity and more growth. So the message is this: we hear you and we are acting. So today I'm announcing that Cabinet has agreed to legislate to soften the housing capacity equivalency requirement. As I say, that number is currently around 2 million. We will be legislating to lower it to 1.6 million. As I say, right now the AUP, Unitary Plan, enables capacity of 1.2 million additional homes. So 1.6 is the midpoint between 1.2 currently in the capacity in the Auckland Unitary Plan and 2 million, which is in Plan Change 78. So it's an advance on the status quo, but it is a significant decrease from the 2 million. The reduction is significant, and it strikes an appropriate balance between Aucklanders concerned about densification and those who wish to see more growth. Early analysis from the Council suggests that compared to Plan Change 78, PC 120 would have seen up to 20% more development capacity being turned into actual houses. What does that mean, and why is that? It's because Plan Change 120 targets capacity in places where people want to live and that are more commercially viable and that have better infrastructure capacity, like town centres and transport hubs. So going from 2 million to at least 1.6 million reduces minimum housing capacity by around 20%, but it's in the context of a stronger plan that could see a 20% increase in planned housing turning into real housing. Hopefully that makes sense. PC 120 is a stronger plan because of the government's and Auckland's shared objective of upzoning around key CRL stations and around a shared commitment to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. We are not backing away from those commitments. On the process from here, Cabinet's asked for a summary of the provisional zoning changes the Council could make once we legislate. And once we legislate the lower housing capacity number, the rest is in Auckland Council's hands. The Council will determine which parts of Auckland they wish to downzone. They can then formally withdraw parts of PC 120 from the process, except for those parts needed to implement the MPSUD or upzone around the key CRL stations. Now, it is worth saying we are legislating in the middle of a plan change process that is already underway. And as I've said publicly, it's been legally complicated, to state the understatement of the century. But we have devised a way through that will allow Aucklanders to see the areas that will be removed from PC 120 and provide another opportunity for Aucklanders to have their say, including those who've already submitted on PC 120 and others who would like to join. So there'll be plenty of consultation. I want to stress that I'm determined to put this issue to bed once and for all. Auckland has been struggling with this plan change process since 2021. Now, Parliament hasn't helped, I accept that, but it's now 2026. I think we've now got the balance right. The new plan means more growth around the areas that make the most economic sense and where there's the most support: CRL stations, rapid transit, metropolitan centres, and it means more flexibility around suburban Auckland. Let me just talk finally about the CBD. The government believes there is significant unrealised potential in the CBD. Existing provisions such as setback requirements, tower dimension controls and height limits, the kind of boring planning rules that most people don't think about, but they actually make an enormous difference to the economic viability of projects. These existing provisions do constrain development, and we think they should be revisited. For largely unfathomable reasons to do with the RMA, the city centre zone is not currently included in the plan change process, and the Council doesn't have a simple mechanism to change that. So Cabinet has agreed that I'll start an investigation into these planning provisions that are holding back the city centre, with a view to making further regulations under the RMA, similar to what we've just announced for Eden Park. So with Eden Park, we've just reached directly as a government into the Auckland Unitary Plan after an investigation and after consultation in order to change those planning rules for Eden Park. We can do the same with the CBD. My intention is that additional housing capacity enabled in the city centre will count towards the new requirement to provide capacity for at least 1.6 million dwellings. Together, these changes will provide Auckland Council greater flexibility to respond to the feedback of Aucklanders and tackle our housing crisis. So what does this look like in practice? It means less growth enabled in suburbs while keeping capacity enabled around CRL stations, train stations, busways, metro centres and the CBD. The evidence is really clear. Well-connected growth drives productivity. And I'm grateful to have an advocate of housing and urbanism in Mayor Brown who backs this like I do. Ultimately, PC 120 is Auckland's plan, not the government's plan. We set the guardrails and the council decides where and how growth occurs. Finally, I just want to take a step back and reflect on the Auckland we're trying to build here. Our ambition for Auckland is that it's allowed to grow and become an international world-class city. That means a growing rapid transit network so people can go where they need to go, growing housing capacity and supply so people have housing choice, a growing events calendar so people can play as hard as they work, and a growing and more productive economy. Today's announcement, I'm confident, is a step forward on increasing housing capacity in Auckland. We've heard Aucklanders' feedback and we have responded. This is an appropriate balance between those who want more growth and those who are worried about it. Some will think we're not going far enough to protect suburbs. Others will think we've taken a step back. But we could debate this question forever and not get closer to an outcome. At some point, someone needs to make a call and move forward, and that's what we're doing today. I'm absolutely committed to extending New Zealand's progress on housing. It's ultimately why I get up every morning, and it's my strong view that if we can fix housing in this country, there is nothing we can't do as a country together. Thank you very much.
Be careful with